Hey, peace to the family. Welcome to We Charge Colonialism, a segment of our podcast and book club. This is a segment on Dr. Amerson Wilson's Falsification of African Consciousness. I kind of did like a remix with the intro with the two countdowns, but it's all good. We're here to discuss this great work by Dr. Amerson Wilson, one of our great thinkers, philosophers, psychologists. We recently covered this book in our Saturday podcast and book club. And so this particular discussion is just a review of the whole book because our organization studies beyond the podcast and book club. We come together and we go over the text and examine it thoroughly. So we have these discussions even outside of the podcast. So we want to come to you right now and go through this book with you, just a thorough examination. I'm Ikemba Ojore, one of the head writers, researchers of We Charge Colonialism, and everybody can introduce themselves.
My name is Jabril Africa. I'm an organizer, part of We Charge Colonialism.
Peace, everyone. This is Frank, the host for the Revolutionary Repatriation Educational Lecture Series.
Peace, everybody. Anthony Jolly, senior at Howard University, Afrikan Studies scholar.
All right, Ashe. So thanks everybody for tuning in. And you know what we need you to do. We need you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed already. And we need you to like and share this podcast and book club. This discussion is just not meant for us, and just the conscious among us who enjoy these discussions and really is trying to raise our consciousness even more, right? We're trying to reach the unconscious. It's the job. What Kwame Ture said, he says, the job of the conscious
to make the unconscious conscious of their unconscious behavior.
There it is. So that's what this is all about, So this particular book, Dr. Amerson Wilson, The Falsification of African Consciousness, Eurocentric History, Psychiatry, and the Politics of White Supremacy. The name itself is powerful, right? So this book is broken up into three parts. The first part being European historiography and oppression exposed, and African analysis and perspective. Part two is Eurocentric political dogmatism, its relationship to the mental health diagnosis of African people. And then the third part, he gets into the political psychology of Black consciousness. So we can begin to discuss this, but just like one thing to stand out for me really quick, though, before we even dive into the book, is the title, The Falsification of African Consciousness. I think it's a fitting title when it comes to what African people have to be very conscious of when we're talking about the social system that we're a part of. Because in order for us to really overturn our relationship with the colonizer, we have to develop an African consciousness. African consciousness is antithetical to the system of quote unquote white supremacy. I know some people don't like that term, but white supremacy is an ideology. It's not us saying that white people are supreme to African people, right? But it's an ideology where they psych themselves out into thinking that they're superior. And then they psych us out into thinking that they're superior, their culture and their way of life is superior to African people. And with that psyching out, we tend to want to integrate and assimilate into their system. And so Dr. Amerson Wilson, boom, he's getting at it. Like we become Europeanized as a result of thinking that what they're doing is the right way of doing things, and what we've been doing as African people is the wrong way. I just wanted to open it up with that, man. But there's a lot to discuss. Wanted to see anybody have any initial thoughts as we get into this conversation.
Yeah, of course. Again, you raised some very powerful points. I think what's important to really debunking the title, it's a falsification, like you said, of African consciousness. And what really does that entail? Operation and viewing the world and how we interpret and understand reality, from a European perspective. And the centering vantage point, ultimately allows us to understand and conceptualize what we are not currently, right? So I think that, that is one of the most powerful points, to really understand, especially when you guys, called upon to answer Kwame Ture, and where ultimately our jobs are as keepers of the memory, right? To, not only bestow memory into the community, but to also, keep that memory going, right? Keep it alive, keep it functioning, and to ultimately debunk that memory, which I think the ancestor did a great job of really underlining and showcasing what it means to have a falsified African consciousness and how did we get here and what we were ultimately before that, right?
Hey, before any of y'all go in, I know y'all about to go in. Let me, our sister Becca, who was supposed to be here but couldn't make it, she's traveling. She wanted to at least offer her review, and I think it's fitting too to have, our African sister give her perspective on this book as well. So we're just going to show a clip of Becca sending in her review. Dedicated soldier. She like, I can't be there physically, live with you guys, but I can do the work and send in my thoughts. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to listen to that really quick. Right. Let's go. All right, everybody can see that? See ya.
Peace, family. I could not, unfortunately, make this morning's live stream for the book review for Dr. Amos Wilson's Falsification of African Consciousness, but I do want to submit a video, just a brief video on my interpretation of the two lectures in Dr. Amos Wilson's book. And also just touch upon some of the things that I took away from this piece, being that I consider myself a student of Dr. Amos Wilson. He was one of the first revolutionary thinkers, Pan-African revolutionary thinkers that I came across as far as lectures. And I would say definitely he is responsible for, I guess, flipping on that switch for me, definitely increasing my interest in Pan-Africanism, in colonialism, in demystifying European historiography, and a lot of the myths coming from the European that have been used to subjugate African people worldwide. Consequences of historical amnesia is probably my favorite chapter coming out of the falsification of African consciousness, just because I think it harped on a lot of the issues that can be seen in our people today. The sense of this apolitical demeanor and I guess like amnesia, basically. We've forgotten completely where we have come from. We've forgotten who we've come from, and we've forgotten the people who oppress us. And I think in this chapter, Dr. Amos Wilson, he explores heavily how the things in the colonial or oppressive society gives out, he identifies the certain things that the oppressor gives out to the colonial subjects, being the African, to keep him in a state of political unawareness. And I think that's very important to observe and also analyze when we talk about the consciousness of African people and how it's been distorted through our historical interactions with other groups of the world, primarily the European. Another important topic that Amos Wilson harped on in the book that I thought was very important was pinpointing out the things in an oppressive society that are used to maintain the status quo. And I think he does a perfect job with analyzing how laws in an oppressive society are used to basically justify the treatment against the colonial subject, and also how the police are used as a apparatus to basically keep the oppressed in check. Overall, I think I learned most from the book was why self-determination is so important and why we need to revitalize that spirit of self-determination in our people, in our African nation here in America, and throughout the diaspora and on the continent ultimately. But I think Amos Wilson brings out the question of why the European has the capacity to oppress us rather than what he does to oppress us. So uh, I think something that I can appreciate the most coming out of this book was this willingness to hold the African accountable and also look at it through the lens of the relationship that we've had with the people who are ending the book was kind of sad for me because I didn't want it to end. I think the last part, the political psychology of Black consciousness, was probably the best part of the book just because it laid out a framework of how to create African centered curriculum. It points out the need for giving its students a knowledge of self. It points out giving them tools, practical tools to break the power dynamics in which they live in, their reality.
Powerful, powerful,
Powerful
powerful.
message from our sister Becca. You know, I shaded her. Oh, we got a sister joining us right now too. So I'm excited.
Mm.
Let's see, is Natasha with us? But let's see if she with us. And yeah, she Becca made some powerful points. Did y'all have any initial reactions to her? And Natasha, you with us or you just hanging out? We'll wait
I'm
and see.
here. I'm here hanging out. I'll hang out for a little bit.
Okay, all right.
Good to have you, sister.
Yeah. So,
No,
any
yeah,
initial reactions? Go ahead.
yeah, yeah. We needed that, brilliant African sister's perspective. I'm glad she was able to send in a video. I know she's busy traveling right now, so it was great to get that in. We needed that perspective. That was very. The sister brought up some very, very brilliant points for sure, and I'm glad she was able to send in that video, like I said. So.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, she made some great points, man. See, all of us over here, we're students of Dr. Emerson Wilson. So, that's big time trouble for Eurocentrism, man. Because we're constantly going to be combating those ideas, those behaviors that are detrimental to African people. So is there anything, I know we probably have a lot of things highlighted. Let's go to like the first chapter though. Does anybody have any thoughts about the first chapter? Because in the first chapter, he really gets into the importance of history and how historiography is used against the interests of African people. And as a historian myself, I found that very powerful because when we talk about historiography, there's a difference between history and historiography, right? So with history, you're looking at the past, you're looking at recorded history, you're looking to interpret that past. But when you're dealing with historiography, you're really examining the writing of history. You're looking at how history was written, what people's philosophies were, what their biases were. So historiography is very important. And so that's what Dr. Amerson Wilson is getting into, how Europeans are really controlling the narrative and writing history a particular way that's in their interest and against the interests of African people. And so I think that's very important. I just wonder if anybody have any thoughts about that or that first part.
Yeah, I can come in. Okay, you want to come in? All right. I can come in to add to that, especially when it comes to the history aspect of what you just mentioned. And again, a lot of time, mostly our generation, we usually says, it was those days has passed, and it is time to move on. And the reality here is, we can move on. The truth is we're going to move on, but how we going to move on? And this is what Dr. Emma Wilson even mentioned in his book. And he said he can understand why some people say they want to move on, because going back or reading back the history, sometimes it is because of anxiety that people do not want to go back to read the history. But he also said that won't be the solution of not going back. And he also says sometimes it's because of fear of experiencing again, because reading that history, it brings back fear and all of those things. But again, he also mentioned that won't be a solution, not to go back to look at our history. We have to go back in order to uncover the fear or to get over that fear. We have to go back and look at how things happen and see how we can find solution to some of the current situation that are still happening to us. And like our sister Brittany said, I just want to go back a little bit on page 31, where Dr. Emma Wilson was talking about. So when it comes to the falsification, and on our page 31, he also went to talk about the mythology, the myth theology of African consciousness or African history or African existence. And he'd also said the European interpretation of the African history was not really to talk about the truth, was not really to tell or to narrate the truth. Then if it was not about narrating the truth or to tell the truth to the world, then what was it about? Even though he said falsification. So this is what it was about. Okay. It was about, he said, it was about the ideas or how this myth, for instance, all Black people are bad. Okay. It was based on a myth to say all Black people are bad, which helped to maintain the racial status quo, and which of course that is what we are experiencing today, right? If one Black do anything, it cover the entire Black race. And we even see it if a Black man in certain part of the world and do something, it will be picked out, and they will use that one narrative of that Black man to cover the entire Black race. And this is what Dr. Emma Wilson was talking about. In order to maintain that status quo, you have to put that race of Blackness, you have to characterize it with everything negative and everything bad. And for example, we can even see that into the society, not only with Black, but let's just go back to the religious aspect. The Muslim, everything, the war have made the religion or Muslim to look bad. So everything they do is bad. So if you see a Muslim person even dressing in their costume according to their religion, but because the way society has framed them to be, the moment you see them wearing that religious stuff, you just feel that they are drugs dealer or they have arm on them. You feel, you feel afraid because society have made it that way. But does that mean the religion is or the way they dress, does that mean they are drugs dealer or they carry arm or they are bar or they are caterer? Absolutely not. And this is how Black people have been confined or put in a specific frame of definition or identity of race by the Caucasian or by European in order to maintain that status quote. And this is what Dr. Emma Wilson was talking about. And then he went as far as saying, look, all those things have been said about us. So at the end of the day, we as Black people, we as African people, what are we going to do? So he said that in identifying those things, we cannot say, oh, you know what, some white people are good and some white people are bad. Okay, because if we want to do that, some white people are good and some white people are bad. At the end of the day, we're going to infuse the solution of African people or of Black people into something different, because at the end of the day, we're going to involve them into our discussion, into our solution, and at the end of the day, we are not going to go anywhere. And he said, the narrative of we as conscious people is not to come and say white people are bad, because that's the narrative they use about us. But at the end of the day, he's trying to tell us that we have to find our own consciousness and find solutions to it, and be able to come from that meta state. So I think I wrote something here as to what he said. Okay, he said the idea is not whether white are devil. So that is not the idea to say, oh, white people are devil, even though we might say that, but that won't be.
Hey, did we lose him, or is that me?
Yeah, I think we lost him.
Frank, I don't know if you can hear us, but we lost you for a second. Anybody want to jump in?
Yeah, I'll jump in. It was a very powerful point. I'm gonna start with your point, Kimba, and then segue into Frank's point. So on page 24, the ancestor says European history can take us where it has taken us only as a result of the fact that we are not in touch with reality, not in touch with our African history in a realistic sense, right? So he's essentially in this point of the text talking about the primordial function of European history, the rewriting of history, and European historiography, which ultimately seeks to serve to maintain the status quo, like Frank said, and the European power and domination of African people, right? Through the means and methods of controlling our psychological functionality, right? And then he goes on to say, again, European history's principal function is first to separate us from the reality of ourselves and to separate us from the reality of the world, right? And then he said, to separate us from the reality of our history and to separate us from its ramifications, we will then take the hallucinations which result from these separations as representing what is real, right? So essentially, not being taught African history, African experiences, African achievements, right? Cultures, language, values, understandings, spiritual belief systems, ways of knowing, cultural meaning making practices, and whatnot, right? The humanistic aspects of pre-colonial Africa will force us to view and to interpret the world from what the European way of life is, according to their biases, how they process, interpret the world. We will only then develop a dialectic notion of what is good, what is right, and what is automatically wrong, right? And we see this practice being perpetuated through religion, especially in economics, and especially in the educational system, in terms of pedagogy, right? And then he goes on, this is my favorite part. He says, the only way we can be in the condition we are in as a people is to believe lies. The lies. He's talking about the hallucinations he was referring to, the myth making, European cultural myth making, right? Our mentality has been reversed and our behavior and our behavior made backwards because we have take the lie for truth and the truth for the lie, right? So he's showcasing you the power of history, the power of historiography, how it's a relationship between behavior, history, right? And then later he's going to show you how there's a relationship between history, behavior, and economics, and then history, behavior, economics, and politics, because a consciousness is reflected in a nation's history, in their memory. And if they don't have that memory, if they don't have that history, then ultimately you can control the people. You can falsify their consciousness. You can get them to spend money, engage economically with any other group of people. You can get them to engage politically with any other group of people. And then socially, culturally, you will get them to be able to ascribe themselves to other people, to believe that they're anything else but African. Anything else but African, black, Negro, nigger, whatever it is, you can slap a label on them because they have no consciousness. Their consciousness has been falsified, right? They don't believe in themselves. And then he goes on to say, a small minority in the world can only rule by making backwards the mentality of the large majority. It makes mentality backwards. It makes mentality backwards the large majority by reversing the truth, creating lies, and getting the majority to believe the lies it creates, right? So then we have to recognize how European history writing, how European historiography has become a perpetual institution, right? To keep African minds, right, backwards. We have to be in a consistent state of behaving backwards, killing each other, right? Drug habits, right? Going massively incarcerating ourselves, not politically organizing ourselves, only ascribing to one political party. As a people, we have to engage being backwards. We're functioning so backwards right now that we won't even conceptualize the idea of formalizing black banks, right? Formalize black institutions, right? Because why? We have that dialectical notion of what is automatically better. The European way is automatically better, and any other practice is automatically obsolete, right? And I have a bunch of other points, but I'm gonna let y'all jump in.
I think the man the man jumping in trying to freeze everybody, man. I'm noticing this right now.
Oh, you were frozen?
Yeah, I was frozen. I didn't even know what happened.
Frank was. I didn't know you were frozen as well.
It did.
Sammy, it sounded like Anthony.
No, Sammy wasn't frozen. It was on your end.
Oh, that was on my end.
Yeah,
all
yeah. Sammy was good. Yeah.
Yeah,
real
but
quick,
let me.
I wanted to say something real quick, Frank. Well, I got chills. I'm gonna sit back and listen to y'all guys, man, because y'all going in right now. Well, really quick, like Nkrumah though, when you was talking, it made me think about Nkrumah in regards to the alienation. What he was talking about in his book, how we become alienated from ourselves and so forth. But yeah, go ahead.
Look out for that. We're about to do a review on that soon, so be on the lookout for that, brothers and sisters.
Yeah,
brother Frank.
Yeah, and you see, this book and Nkrumah book, they almost intertwined, and this is why I got prepared for Nkrumah book instead of this. But however, let me just add to what our brother just said in terms of that, because I froze. So Dr. Emma Wilson, as I wrote in my book here, they say, and what I'm just going to add to that, he said, it is not just about telling the truth alone. It is about Black people gaining self-control. It is about gaining power as well. It is about being able to protect and advance our survival. And he went as far as saying, but if we get caught up in meaning of trying to figure out whether there are good ones, whether there are good white people, and whether there are bad other ones between us, we may find ourselves being destroyed in our status. So he's trying to tell us that is not a direction to say, oh, but you know what, there are some good European or some good days, because at the end of the day, they classify all in one package. So if we are doing that too, we should classify it in one package, but at the same time, find our own solution to move on them to say there are other good white people. So he's trying to tell us that won't be the solution, because at the end of the day, we will destroy ourselves again and we will move on. So yeah, we can go ahead.
Yeah, and I want to touch on that because I was kind of sad that you froze up because I wanted you to finish that point. And yeah, Dr. Amos has made it clear as a student of his, and he's probably one of, if not my biggest inspiration within gaining my consciousness. Who has I always tell brothers and sisters, he's like literally the glasses for consciousness. To me, he helps you understand reality and why things are exactly the way they are. So I would strongly urge you, brothers and sisters, to research Dr. Amos. He has like hundreds of lectures on YouTube where you're watching this right now, like hundreds. Check him out. Listen to what he has to say. Learn from our, ancestor. Read his many books as well. But Dr. Amos has made it very clear, being a student of his, that the European is our enemy. He's made it very clear in this book many times, right? He stated, if I could pull it up, I have this whole thing highlighted. We had been at war with the Europeans continuously for the last 2,000 years, right? So Dr. Amos has always been very clear on who our enemies are, and not only the Europeans, but other groups of people are enemies. And that's the thing with nationalism, as a brother I know says, Pan-African nationalists are clear that all groups of people who are non-Africans are enemies or potential enemies. Not necessarily they are, but all groups are either enemies or potential enemies. And he's very clear on that. And one of the things that he stated, and I actually want Brother Kimba to go to this page 13 in the book. Yeah, they pulled up. All right, I'm gonna start reading. The study of history cannot be a mere celebration of those who struggled on our behalf. We must be instructed by history and should transform history into concrete reality, into planning and development, into construction of power and the ability to ensure our survival as a people. It's very clear on that. It's very, very important that we need to use history for our liberation. It shouldn't be, and he actually later down in this paragraph goes into how Black History Month, how we use Black history as a celebration, as a party of sorts, where we should be using that as a tool towards our liberation. Very clear on that. And actually go back to page 11 as well, where he says, so as I stated earlier, history contains both progress and regress. However, regress at this point in history will not be a situation where we will be able to fight the battle all over again. Regression at this point in history essentially spells annihilation for Africans, not only in America, but Africans the world over. So we need to get this straightened out. We need to organize. We need to, organize not only ourselves, but our money, our resources, education system. In every way, shape, or form, we need to organize ourselves. Because if we don't, as Dr. Amos made very clear, we won't be able to do this all over again. We won't have another reconstruction again. We need to get this right. That's where I leave it off.
Yeah, and
I want to see if Natasha wanted to add something. I think like y'all mentioned Becca mentioned part 3 being her favorite part, or the best part she thought was the best part. And I want to see if anybody want to touch on part 2 and part 3, because it is pretty deep when he gets into like the psychology and how we have to be mad in order for them to maintain their position of power, and how abnormality and normality is a political, economic, construct. And so understanding that. But Natasha, you wanted to add anything?
The one thing I've been thinking about, just listening to everybody talk and going through some of the book in terms of history, especially what Brother Jabril brought up, with history being something that we have been, I guess, for a while now engaging in a way, like specifically like we're talking about our history. and we've just been engaging it in it in like a really shallow, superficial way that doesn't that we don't end up internalizing. And so I've been doing a lot of reading around African-centered education and re-Africanization. And one of the things I'm, also currently reading Nation Building Theory and Practice in African-centered Education. And so one of the things he was talking about, Baba Koto, was that history, we know that like history and culture are so intertwined. And when we think about talking about re-Africanization, and we're talking about, and he mentioned how at some point, maybe like, I think like, I guess maybe like in the 90s, going into the early 2000s, we, not just in New York, but I can give the example of New York and how you would have these communiversities, right? Where you have, and they have them, they had them in different states too. But you would have a lot of people just coming to the lectures to just listen to, the knowledge that was being given out. And so we're getting all of this history and we're getting all of this knowledge, but we're not applying it personally. Like we're not internalizing it. We're not making it like the practice of our lives. And so therefore, like Amos Wilson is saying, it doesn't become a threat, right? If we're just doing this additive, we're gonna add, Black people did this and Black people did that. Of course, everyone's gonna celebrate that because it poses no threat. So if you're just doing it in a sense where you're just getting the information just so you can feel good about, like he mentions where he says like it becomes this ego thing. You're not doing anything with it, and so therefore it doesn't become anything that poses a threat to any of it. We know like Black history, ethnic studies, Black studies. The point was to have this real in-depth study of our history in a way that it could transform us in order for us to not just fight against the system, but to get back to who we are. And so this idea of like historiography, when he's talking about stealing it or misrepresenting it or just completely lying and distorting the truth about our history, that then leads into why we don't see ourselves culturally as African people, why we wouldn't want to go and, re-Africanize ourselves or even take up the mantle, like, that Cabral talks about culture as a weapon when we're talking about fighting against, colonialism and, the system of white terror and domination.
Yeah, and it's
Hey,
so
appreciate
powerful.
that. To Sith Lord, definitely he would definitely agree with that. But go ahead, Anthony.
Yeah, and it's so
just addressing
powerful.
that question.
Yeah, and it's so powerful, the role of history and memory, as it relates to Africans engaging in community, developing community, and perpetuate community values, right? So history and memory serves the community in every facet of life. You can't separate it from any and everything. And I think that's what Brother Amos is really trying to get us to understand and to get us to truly internalize. Like we can use history and memory to radically transform all aspects of our society, right? That's also what Nkrumah, as Frank mentioned, was trying to get us to understand, right? Looking towards past kingdoms, pre-colonial Africa, before the European allegedly brought light to Africa, and how we can use the way that they practiced and dealt with problems and issues to achieve independence, right? To decolonize Africa and then to further unify ourselves, right? So I think it's important. And the brother in the comments, he brought up socialism, right? You can't separate history, memory, African history, African memory from socialism, right? So we as Africans attempting to achieve liberation, we tend to only rely upon the European articulation of socialism, right? And not really Dr. John Henry Clark transitioned to being an ancestor. He would agree with this statement. We don't do enough of recovering memory, the deep, long genealogies of African memory, and how we engaged in communalism before Europeans began to articulate that communalism as a practice of socialism, right? Communism, right? So that in and of itself is an alienization, is a backwards articulation of what it means to be African, right? African engaging in economic practices, political practices. Memory and history has always been a reflection of politics and economics, and also social cultural manifestations of those politics and economics. Communalism was the grounded foundation of all aspects of that. And I think we as Africans globally, we have to spend more time recovering that memory and that practice of communalism and learn to articulate reality from our African-centered standpoint and not rely on European articulations of economic practices. And Amos Wilson, he says that we think this way because they have destroyed our confidence, our capacity to think for ourselves and to believe that we are capable of creating a world as great or greater than the Eurocentric one presently exists, right? So I think we have to, really begin to start to conceptualize and to reimagine what our world, our society can look like and how it can be practiced if we start again being uncompromisingly African in the sense that we identify with being African socially, culturally, right, economically, right, and then politically, right. And if we want to use other methods to achieve liberations, okay, instead of using these methods that have historically been articulated through European social cultural reality, let's instead try to conceptualize, what has already been there, recover that, or create it through our own understandings and comprehensions, right?
Okay, now,
Yeah,
and
I could just add something real quick to that.
Fish
And I think
grease.
like what it is there's only a few ways that you can practice an economic system. There's not a whole lot of different ways. I think what determines the type of economic system and how it's practiced and how it differs is what we place value on in the system. And so, socialism itself, like there's different ways that socialism can show up. There can be an African-centered, I believe, an African-centered, socialism based off of what we value, and there could be a different kind of socialism that Europeans may develop that's really still antithetical to the environment and to human beings. And so I think like that's really the difference. And so just to build off what Anthony said, I think that's where the African centeredness comes from. When we go back and look at what our ancestors, how they value human life and the environment, and making sure that that's on the agenda. Human beings, and the brother was talking about workers, a collective. I think like that's moving in the right direction is when we begin to start valuing the workers over those colonizers and exploiters who represent small elite. So just wanted to throw that in there. Anybody going to get to this? I know Frank, you want to say so, but if anybody can touch on part 2 or part 3, because he gets into this.
Yeah, I got some heat for that.
All right.
All right. So you want me to come in before somebody can come in with part 2 or part 3?
Oh no, go ahead. Y'all have to rush it.
All right.
I'm just like want to hear something on it though.
To add to what you and Anthony said. So on page 55, Dr. Emma Wilson also talked about critical thinking, and he tried to make it clear that we as African people, we have been conditioned not to critically think. And he said that have also been the contribution of the church. So I'm just going to read something there, and then before I can, a little bit elaborate on it. So page 55, starting from the second paragraph, I believe, where he said, question. He said, I think of the church as a very vulnerable institution. How do you see the church, and what should it become? So he asked a question. And then he said, Brother Wilson, of course, the measure of the church is one of propagating and encouraging spirituality, active and rightful behavior among people. Some people will say salvation also, but the church is a social institution like any other institution. It does not have to be stuck with that divination and perception of itself. Now, in further than it says, when you look at art on TV and hear them on the radio, you will note that they are designed to bypass a person critical and analytical scrutiny. They are designed to speak directly to the emotion so that the person acts in terms of feelings instead of reasoning. And this is what exactly the church, the religion have done to African people worldwide. They have used the religion to condition the mind of African people, to condition the revolutionary status of African people. And that is what we call African people or Black people on a Black agenda. Once they feel that it's all Black agenda or it's all Black activities, none of them want to come because they want to see other races there. This is what exactly the church have done to the African population or to the African masses by conditioning their mind. He also went as far as saying, therefore, emotion are the bread and butter of advertising, and ultimately in this society, the bread and butter of let me go back again. Therefore, emotion are the bread and butter of advertising, and ultimately the bread and butter of the economic or social system. So often we as African in America, and not only in America here, even though he's saying America, but even also on the African continent and around the world, we are encouraged to be emotional and spiritual. Often we confuse the two things to the exclusion of critical thinking. And this is exactly the dilemma of African people worldwide. So he went as far as saying, if I can continue, he said, we are kept in this emotional spiritual state, and it is a bogey kind of state. It opens us to manipulation by external forces such that we cannot bring to bear our own everyday problems, common sense, and reasoning. So why the church, I can't go back again. Anyway, so that's some of the how they call it outline he put that when it comes to this whole religion thing. And that is what even in America here, sometimes even on TV, right, on CNN or BBC, if something happened and African people begin to react, the first thing you will hear the media, which says, where are the churches? Where are the pastor? Only African people, they will always bring that narrative to where are the churches? Where are the pastor? Where are the deacons? Because they have put us in a state of mind to make us believe that, or to make society believe that only those people can solve our problem. Well, when it comes to other races, they don't say where are the pastors, they say where are the senators, where are the representatives, where are the congressmen, or where is the president? They bring out these people to solve Caucasian problem or white people problem. But when it comes to Black people, they say, no, let's go to the church, the back of the building, and look for those pastors. And these we have found ourselves in as Black people, not only in America, but all around the world.
Ashayo.
I'm privileged to be here. Y'all all cooking with fish grease. Y'all killing it.
Like again, like that section you took that you picked and read, bring me back to Nkrumah, and maybe because it's fresh, we just finished reading Nkrumah. Like, because
I hate his name keeps coming up.
Yeah,
It's Dr. Amos time. Come on.
I'm like, I just read this.
I know.
We talked about the he's basically talking about a false consciousness and how like this separation, like the church, how church and religion is used to like separate us from coming up with solutions, practical material solutions to our problem, where we look for something external to solve our problem. And so we get caught up in how like philosophy has been disconnected from our material conditions, when as African people it was intertwined. So when I hear this read, I'm like, yo, this is I think Dr. Wilson says it in a way that's more palatable, I think, for a lot of folks. But I wanted to see like the time, because we're out of balance with the feminine and masculine. So we got to make sure that Tasha try to bring some balance into this conversation. You wanted to add anything?
When it comes to the spiritual and what he's talking about, definitely I agree. I will say that, one of the things when it comes to this idea, like you were saying, Brother Kimba, of spiritual systems or religions, and the way in which these religions have been basically weaponized against us, for us to remain in a docile state, not wanting to actually do anything in this particular time and disconnecting us from the material reality. I think that one of the things when we're talking about, because obviously we have a lot of critiques about the Black church or Islam or different religions that are not, necessarily our specific, these, like one of the specific types of African spiritual systems that we do have, we lose that ability to see that, because in Christianity or in Islam, whether or not they say like, okay, God is in you, which they will say fleetingly within the Bible or like, within the Quran, people don't really take that to heart. They don't really take that as something that's true. But when we talk about our spiritual systems, whether you're talking about Yoruba or you're talking about ancient Kemetic spiritual systems, you talk about like Ma'at and the deities and the principles that are represented in that, there was always the concept, and there still is the concept that, okay, God is within you, like the creator is within you, like you are part of everything. And when we think about even Vundun, and you think about like the role that spirituality has played within our liberation movements, our revolts, because we understood that when we're thinking about maroonage, or when we're thinking about uprisings here, because we know that obviously the fight is physical, but it's also mental too, right? Like we're talking about. And so we're holding on to our spiritual systems when we think about and our ideas of what the creator is, and how to access it, and what we can do in the in the physical as gods ourselves. And so in keeping with those ideas, we can look at the Haitian Revolution, or we could look at the even when we think about like Nat Turner, even when we think about the creation of the AME Church, that you have these African ideas that are being still held on to and protected in order for us to be able to bring in the spiritual side of what we need, understanding that, yeah, in this physical realm, that there are things that we need to do and must do that are directly connected to the non-physical realm. And so I think that when we're talking about the way in which these religions have been weaponized against us, you can see how we've been fighting spiritually and even like mentally to holding on to those concepts of what it really means to be spiritual, or what does it really mean to be like the creator or connected to the creator, where nowadays you don't have any sense of that. And we know that that's part of the thing that was the fight to get to be taken out of us, right? This idea that we are creators, that we are part of creation, that we are gods walking here. We do have the ability to create, and in the same ways that the energies create, of the world. So I think when it comes to the spiritual systems and what he's talking about here, I think that's the thing that we have to recognize. And then in recognizing that, understand why we have to move away from these systems, because they don't empower us in that way. They don't allow us to see those truths. They've taken that memory that our ancestors have held on to of our spiritual systems, and slowly but surely completely eradicated it from any of these spiritual systems that we practice today, when we think about the main ones that are in our communities, and that a lot of us attend. So even if people have to figure out how do you get that back into it, if you're practicing Christianity or Islam, how do you bring back the idea and the understanding of the true essence of spirituality, of spirit? How do you bring that back in a way that serves us, that it's not doing now? Even if they don't want to let it go, because we know a lot of our people, they don't want to let their Christianity go necessarily, and they don't want to let their Islam go necessarily. But the question is, if you're not going to let it go, but how do you bring some of our understandings of spirituality back into that, so that you can do something, right? So that it can tell you, like, you can do something now. You don't have to wait till later. Or the people who they say are your saviors are not. Well, yeah, that's my thought, my addition.
Great point, sister.
Great. Yeah, so to add to that, also of what you just said in terms of African consciousness, and as Dr. Wilson continue to elaborate and to educate us on these things, on page 59, I'm going to jump from pages to pages to try to connect the dialogue. So on page 59, I'm going to read from there. He said, so if you have grounded yourself and your personality in your own history, in African tradition, and your consciousness is Afrocentric, then the European cause can be of value to you. On certain level, you can enjoy them. You can enjoy the pleasure of seeing through them. Now, let me just go a little bit down. And then he went as far as saying, the beauty of African tradition is that it is not alienated in a book. It is part and parcel of the total African personality. Studying European discipline under those circumstances can be of supreme value. Now, let's go to page 60, and then let me connect the dot. Then let's go to page 60. Now, page 60, I'm going to read from the second paragraph. It says that when we examine the world today, the war in so-called third world countries, look and see if they are not fighting each other over European ideology instead of basing their political ideology upon a profound analysis of their own history and experience, and developing their economic or political or social program should be based on an analysis of themselves, thereby developing their own intellectual tools as they do so. Instead, they grasp on an imported foreign ideology, one getting it from the United States and the other one getting it from Russia, and they kill each other over them. And this is what exactly happening, and Dr. Emma Wilson is making it known and clear to us. Now, even on the African continent, right? The reason why most of our African leaders do not understand, even though they rule, they lead, but they do not understand what it means to rule your people or to lead your people, because they bring in European ideology, they bring in European democracy, they bring in European system, and European system is toxic to the African livelihood or to the African system or to the African ideology, right? It's toxic. So whenever you import this system onto the African continent or into our community, it goes against our doctrine, it goes against our life, our livelihood, it goes against the masses. And then at the end, you tend to corrupt your people. And that is why on the African continent, we have almost everything it takes for every African to be a millionaire, to be a billionaire. But because of the system we import from Europe and America, which was based on corruption, which was based on racism, which was based on division, which was based on exclusion, we take that onto the African continent, we exclude our people into what our people need to be part of and process of, and then we give it back to the European. We invite them and tell them, come and take our resources, or they invite us and come and have meeting with them, give our breakfast, and then go on the African continent and take our resources and make their economy to grow. And then in turn, they tell us, we African the continent or the nation, we are third world country, we deserve no better life. And then at the end, they tell our African leaders, you are like that because you are corrupt. You are like that because you have no good leadership. These are the things that Dr. Emma Wilson is telling us, that we cannot import European ideology on the African continent and in African community, because these ideologies, in the first place, it is because of their ideology we are in a condition in which we are in today. So how can we use those things to be the solution to our problem?
8, man. Man, you 8. Oh my goodness.
I think that when we speaking about, how can we think about solutions to our problems, I think one of the things that we're talking about, right, is trying to figure out solutions to our problems. We know that, like, everybody everywhere. Okay, I'm not going to say everybody everywhere, because obviously, if everybody everywhere was trying to find solutions to our problems, our problems would be solved. Mm-hmm. But I think in what you were bringing up, Frank, in terms of finding solutions to our problems, and that us not really being able to find solutions to our problems because we keep bringing in European ways of thinking and European ideologies, and even, as he said in the passage that you read, when we're fighting against we're fighting against these European ideologies or these foreign ideologies that really have nothing to do with us, that are not our problems. Like, even when we think about, let's say, the Civil War, they were trying to say, like, okay, yeah, what Black people and white people, like, when we're fighting for the Civil War, we were all fighting for the same thing, to end enslavement. But we wanted to end enslavement. White people, what they were fighting against was something else. I mean, they wanted to, see which group of white people had the control, who got to rule, and how do we put our stuff, our things back together. Meaning white people, like, they're fighting to see, like, okay, how do we work in a way that we can still maintain power? That's what they were fighting over. How do we, make this transition the easiest? And so that's why we saw, like, after Reconstruction, especially here in America, you have Black people still not getting what they needed after this whole, Civil War, enslavement ends. But you have, tons of people dying after the Civil War. When we think about Black people not getting the land that they needed, their European abolitionists, they're coming down to the South and trying to run the independent institutions that, and change the independent institutions that they've created. And so understanding that we're not fighting for the same things, like their ideologies, their goals are not ours. And so when we think about the solutions, we always have to think about our solutions in terms of what does it look like for Black people, be irrespective of whatever Europeans may be saying or doing, but have such tunnel vision that we're thinking specifically about, okay, what is it that our solutions are? Don't worry about what they're fighting, what Europeans are fighting over. Don't worry about what they're telling you got to fight over. Don't worry about what they're telling you is the most important, but what are the things that we know to be the most important and the things that we have to fight for, and the solutions that we need to find when we're thinking about solutions for any of our problems. Because I think that's where we get tripped up a lot, is trying to balance it out with, okay, with our problems, we're going to fight for our problems, but we know that, the Europeans, the stuff that's going on, we have to think about that too. Yeah, we can think about it too in terms of this is the time and space, and these are the peripheral things that are going on, but it's not our issue to solve these problems that they're telling us are our problems. We need to know what our specific problems are based on our own ideologies.
Yeah, and I agree. I think it's so interesting because the ancestor he brought up the need to self-define yourself, right? Self-definition is so powerful, right? We don't even begin to really comprehend how many solutions we have at the forefront, right? Instead of viewing some of the things like, for instance, cooperation is a solution to a lot of issues that we have. Mobilization is a solution to a lot of issues that we have. Unity is a solution to a lot of issues that we have. Organization is the primordial solution to a lot of the issues that we have, but we view so many things as obsolete, right? For instance, memory and history, right? Self-love, for instance, right? So we have so many solutions, but I think the issue lies within, in my opinion, it would be communalism. And this is the point that I wanted to harp on. How individualism, in the words of the ancestor, how individualism seeks to perpetuate European dominance, right? So I'm just gonna skip through the book. It's mainly in part 3, but I'm gonna skip through and I'll go through some of my points. He says one of the ideologies, there are a number, but we will look at just one today, projected to maintain European dominance, is the ideology of individualism. We hear a great deal today of the do your own thing and I do mine kind of situation, the so-called individualization of success and failure. That is where the individual is seen as a result of what we call personal ineptness or misbehavior as a sign of moral inferiority. And what I really want to harp on is how we ascribe, issues in our community, like the sister brought up, as a result of not, in the ancestors' word, social structure issues, but instead individualism, right? So when we look at like police genocide, perpetual anti-blackness, right? When we look at mass incarceration, right? When we look at African displacement, right? When we look at the lack of political consciousness, right? We look at all these things as individualistic issues, but not as social structural issues. And when it comes to this ideology of individualism, which we all, in some way, some form, ascribe ourselves to, right? Because we're still all going through the decolonization process as a lifelong process. Individualism, greatly affects the youth. It targets the youth, and it really rectifies itself in our educational system, right? Especially with especially with our especially with our teachers' practice of pedagogy. We always, and he brings up this example that I'm gonna bring up, but it starts as simple as asking a child, what do they want to be when they grow up, right? So, automatically putting the emphasis on the child rather than the community. What does the community exactly? What does the community need you to be for when you grow up? There's a very difference in orientation between those two questions when you ask that child that. So automatically, instead of allowing the child as the individual to see himself in the society, allow the society to bring the child into the community to better the community. Um, and then he goes on to state, he says that, where is the section? It is individualistic sensibility. It's individualistic sensibility encourages us to dream big, to imagine that the best of everything is within our grasp and within our reach. And at the same time, it denies the possibilities for these dreams to become reality. It tells our young teenagers that if they do not wear the right kinds of sneakers and the right kinds of jeans and possess the right kinds of eyeglasses frames on their faces, that they are nothing. It tells them that if they have not achieved along the lines of the society dictates, that they are worthless, and at the same time denies them the opportunity and the structure, the means by which the achievements can be attained. And therefore, our teenagers and we as adults get caught in a major contradiction and a major dilemma. And when we fail to deal with it, we are told that it is the result of some uh, deficiency in our personality, some genetic problem, some cultural problem, right? And he goes on to say this kind of ideology, of course, not only is an ideology that rationalizes the status quo and removes the responsibility from the social structures developed by Europeans and removes the responsibility from the structure for bringing about the conditions inherent in the community and in individuals. It is also designed to drive us insane. So this ideology is merely a means of rationalizing the status quo, but is also a projective means of creating an abnormal state of mind. And again, when we examine the history of African people, especially at the hands of European dominion, we have to understand the reason why there was a stripping of language, why there was a stripping of culture, why there was a dehumanization process and a demoralization process, right? And we have to understand that this is a tactic of European imperialism, right, to further subjugate Africans in the 21st century. And it's continually being practiced to this very day through the forms of individualism, as we're seeing. And then he goes on earlier in the chapter, he states, being cut off from your past only means that you have gained knowledge at the cost of being alienated. If you have gained an alienated knowledge, if you have gained an alienated knowledge can only be used in the interest of aliens, right? Look at who you work for once you know computer science and don't know your history. That's one of the unwritten rules. They will teach you math and science and so forth to the degree that you forget who you are, your history, and you forget your connectedness with your people, because it's only when you are unconnected that you can be of use to aliens. You cannot use alienated knowledge for yourself. Knowledge must be connected and contained in a historical structure, in a cultural structure, if it's to work for a particular people. That's why you can get degrees in business administration and build no businesses. You can be the CEO of Xerox, yet not build your own, right? So then, again, going back to, like, for instance, enslavement, the stripping of culture, the stripping of language, the stripping of these things that inherently made us African, right? That connected us to people, the value of being connected to people, seeing ourselves in a social network, right? Seeing ourselves in a metaphysical network, right? We're connected to not only the environment, we're connected not only to each other, but we're also connected to who we were in the past, our ancestors, right? There was always spherical levels of us being connected to each other, and we never existed for just individual means. That is a tactic of European dominance that is currently being perpetuated now, right? So we have so many children now that consistently say, I have to get to this, I have to get to that, I got to get these shoes, I have to get this jacket, I have to get this amount of money, I have to do it by any means necessary. It's a I, but it's never for nation building. It's never for communal building. It's never for any of that. It's just for I. And that in communalism, collectivism is a solution to the issues that plague African people. And we have to get to that. We have to get to that. And we have to figure out ways to combine history, memory, power, and nation building.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anthony. Yeah, Brother Jibril, let me just add to what Anthony said. And I think there's a question here, and I think what you just said, it kind of go into depth in trying to answer this question posted by TZ. So he said, at all panelists, what are the quality manifested by individuals who have achieved this African center consciousness? One quality I can say is this book right here. That's one quality by an individual and who went to the length bringing out knowledge. And again, I think Brother Anthony want to add to this question, then I can go ahead and
Yeah, I do too. After you go, Frank.
Okay. So I think another quality that is possessed would be recognizing that first and foremost, all of our revolutionary thinkers were on the same code as to we exist for the betterment of our people. We serve our people, right? So our achievements, if we're viewing them as individual achievements, they only are possible because of the people, right? So I think that's just in and of itself like a personality quality, right? That is possessed by any Khalid Muhammad, Malcolm X, Kwame Nkrumah, Nyeri, Amin Sékou Touré, right? Any of them, they're serving their people. They recognize that they're just one person that exists for the betterment of the community, the people, and they understood that their people existed everywhere.
Okay, Jabri, you want to go in, and then before I can.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. I would say to answer the brother's question, I would say a quality that manifests an individual who achieves this African-centered consciousness is actually fighting back against the enemy, doing something for your people to help liberate your people. There are a lot of people who read these books, even these revolutionary books like African-centered consciousness by Dr. Amos, who studied Dr. Amos, studied Dr. Clark, but they're not doing anything to help liberate their people. They don't have African-centered consciousness as far as I'm concerned, because you're not trying to take the oppression, trying to take the hold of white supremacy has on our people globally. So that's what I would say. I mean, it's clear as day. If you're not fighting back, you don't have the African-centered consciousness. Couldn't be more simpler than that.
Now, in adding to that question, Brother Tizu, one of the group in the United States currently that is very organized, and I would tell you is one of the most organized Black organization. You know, people may disagree with me, but it's one of the most organized Black organization in the United States, to the extent that this group have been labeled as hate group. This group is called the Black Israelites. Now, if you see their doctrine, right? Almost every one of them, what are young, what are old, what are small, they all know the story. If you check on the street, like in various states, you're going to see these young folks on the street preaching about the Black Israelites, about they are the true Hebrew, they are the true Israelites. They are one of the most organized group in the United States, okay, carry on the doctrine, carry on the belief, the ideology, okay, of the Black Israelite, of the Hebrews, because they know the subject matter and they know the history and they are well organized in various states. And I think this is what we need to do as African people, as Black people. We need to organize and when it comes to history, some of our past, how they call it, our leaders or advocates that been there. I think in our time we have the most, how they call it, tools or to our disposal, right, to be more organized than the people that came after us. Just the internet alone, it gave us the privilege or the opportunity to pass on messages or education to our people. Like I watched a video before from one of our old folks, and they were asking him doing Dr. King's time. And he said he didn't even know about Dr. King. Why? Because at that time there was nothing like internet. You only get in touch with Dr. King, or maybe if you're around the DC area or he was coming to your state, and you walk thousands of miles to go there, because at that time Black people were not getting in car. Maybe there was buses, but you understand history where there was racism. It was very difficult for Black people or for African people to get on a bus. It was difficult, right? So he said he didn't really know about Dr. King. It was because things were not at their disposal. But we in this time, we have the opportunity and we have this material, even though it gave us some constraint, they still restrict us, but we use it, right, to organize ourselves. And that is what the Black Israelites have done in almost every state. You see them that they preach the same thing, they're on the same page, okay? They bring out the messages and they are uniting and they are recruiting more people. And this is what I think we as African people, that what our forefathers they need to do to organize, we are the one to do it. Even current time, even those that try to do it individually, what happened to them? The same system when it killed them and assassinated them, right? And again, maybe you came late, but let me just go back to page 31 that we have discussed. And this is what this book is called, The Falsification of African Consciousness, the falsification of African existence, right? Now, and he said, the narrative of the Caucasian or the European was not to tell the true story of Black people. And that is what Anthony just said. If you really want to understand why these people did not say the good thing about Africa, right? It was for a purpose. And this purpose was about what? Some of these purpose was about what? To maintain the status quo, right, of racial status, to maintain, the racial status quo between white and Black. White is how they call it, supreme, and Black is the inferior being. And that is what have been going on, and that is why systematically Black people are still being viewed at the bottom of society, to the extent almost every nation in the world look at the Black nation as the least in society. Okay, and this is why Dr. Emma Wilson said, in order to overcome these things, we have to unite, we have to organize. Organization is the key. Even as how they call it, Secretary talked about it before, that organization is the key to our movement, to our liberation. And this is what he said, Dr. Emma Wilson said, but if we are to get caught up in the meaning of trying to figure out whether there are good or bad, European among us, we will end up being destroyed in our studies. So that is why when we're doing studies like this are important to be able to bring us together, to build out, so that mistake that was done in the past, okay, it will not be done in the present. So this is why this study is important. I don't know if that was able to answer your question, but
I want to touch on something, Brother Frank, and I just kind of want to push back. I'd say, I think the most of you're like super brilliant, but like the Hebrew Israelites, everything I've seen of them, I kind of avoid them like the FBA. They're very anti-African, and you said like they're on the streets, with those microphones, right? Have you seen videos where they actually tell African brothers and sisters that we're going to enslave you? They're the epitome of anti-African. They are our enemies, clear and simple. They're the FBA before FBA became a thing. They're the religious version of that, if you will, right? So can you touch on that, please, brother?
Yeah, no, I have seen that. What I'm saying here is, right, their ideology, the way in which they are organized. That is what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying I
That's
believe. I'm not saying I believe.
The way they're organized, okay.
Yes, I'm saying
Yeah.
the way they are organized, and you can see they are growing. All right, they are growing almost every state.
Unfortunately.
They have established. Yes.
Yeah,
You see?
unfortunately.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
get it. And
I
I
hear
agree.
what you're
I
saying.
do think,
Yeah.
yeah, and I
Go
agree.
ahead,
I
brother.
think they're super organized, especially in DC. I see them every day.
Mhm.
They're constantly out mobilizing. Like you can tell, like they have an organized front.
Have you gotten in a debate with them? I could see you getting into one with
Hey, man, I
them.
try to avoid them. I try to avoid them, but
Yeah.
they are organized. Like they're definitely tactical and strategic when it comes to what they're doing. And just like the FBA movement, the ADOS movement, they're growing as well, especially on social
They're
media.
growing, but they're not organized
Yeah.
at all. Yeah.
But some solutions that I think that are powerful that Amos Wilson brought up were essentially the reintegration of African history, right? So he stated that the true history and culture of African peoples must be rediscovered, re-examined, and reintegrated by African people. These approaches to African history and culture must conjointly become vehicles which facilitate the collective and cooperative action of African peoples in the pursuit of their liberation. The appropriate reclamation of African history and culture will provide Africans with a realistic and supportive vision of reality, with self knowledge, self esteem, self confidence, self acceptance, and self control, with the ability to form empowering, affectionate relationships, and the ability to engage in proactive self interested, productive activity, and with a self enhancing sense of purpose and existential meaningfulness. An appropriate understanding of African history and culture will provide Africans with an honest and accurate appraisal of their strengths and needs as well as those of their European counterparts. Such an understanding will allow them to discover the strategic and tactical means of liberating themselves from white supremacy. Right. And I think he lists a ton of solutions, especially in part three. But this is the solution that I think is most important: developing the African personality, right, and allowing that to be the foundation for achieving liberation and to further unify Africans across the world community, right. And I think that this is so powerful because I think this is an aspect of our struggle that has been going on for since the 15th century, that I think we're consistently glancing over the ideological aspect of it, right, and how we can use history, memory as a methodological means of ideologically being on code, consistently being on code, right. And like you said, it will be the vehicle from which we drive to achieve liberation, right. So we all have to be in the car to drive that car and to get to liberation, right. We have to be in the car, right. We can't be on scooters and skateboards, we have to be in the car, the African car, right.
That's powerful. That's powerful. I want to touch on a point made. This is chapter 70 in the book, Brothers and Sisters. He's going, essentially, it's about the insanity as a model of sanity. So he says the most insane people on earth today are used as a model for sanity. The insanity of racist Europeans itself is not questioned. The insanity of European normality is not questioned. The possibility that what we call normal in itself is what we call normal is itself insane is not questioned. That the organization of society, the nature of its human relations, the structure of its economic systems, the values that motivate it are the result of madness of a people. And he's talking about how we view European sanity. You know how some people say, oh, we want to be like them, and they're referring to Caucasian people. Everything about European people historically tells us that those people are using our psychology are insane, right? And we tend to now to understand is different groups of people have different psychologies, and Dr. Amos throughout all of his works has talked about this here and there. Psychologically, we're not all the same. You know how some people say, "Oh, all people are the same except the skin color." That couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, you can even talk about how even the foods that are good for us are very different. So we couldn't be more different. We need to understand that, especially psychologically, right? So we need to be very mindful. And how do we learn that? How do we learn the people's psychology? And he goes into it. I literally have like this whole thing highlighted, so it's kind of hard to
Hey,
find
come on,
things.
man.
But brilliant. Dr. Amos is my favorite mind of all time. But like we got to understand, like there's the way you learn people's psychology, and he goes into this, is by studying their history. That's how you learn different groups of people's psychology. Study their history, study what they've done throughout their history, and particularly study their relationship with African people historically. So if you understand our history with these people has been war, has been destruction of African civilization, African psychology, and you think that now things have changed, you're a crazy person. You got to understand, you got to learn your history, not only your history, but also the history of other groups of people, especially your enemies as well, so we can know how to move forward. If you don't do that, I mean, this whole book will literally explain everything that's going wrong with you. We gotta study. We gotta study.
And in adding to that, I think we are getting close to 1 o'clock. But in adding to that, I'm just going to read from page 68 to 69 to try to connect something that when it comes to what you were just saying about even individualism and the ideology of Western supremacy. So that should be the third paragraph. It says that is individualism. There's individual moral sensibility tied to persuade us that this society is equal and that the society make available to all individual equal opportunity to advance in it. And if they fail, it is the result of their own personal problem. Of course, it becomes obvious that this kind of approach is rational and rationalization by means of which the society itself ignores its own input as far as the failure of a person or people, such as our people, are concerned. It helps us to ignore the impact of the social structure upon individual achievement and mobility. It turned almost literally to try and eradicate the idea that the individual succeed or fail within a social structure. Since the individual does not succeed or fail in a vacuum, but succeed or failed in a social system, the social system must be taken into consideration when we evaluate individual success and failures. This implied the possibility that the social structure and the failures of others, however, a society developed by imperialistic European who arrogates to himself the dominance and rule over the vast majority of people cannot afford to truly and honestly look at the possibility that it is the structure of the Eurocentric society itself which greatly influence the individual and groups fate of our people. Now, this is what Dr. Emma Wilson is talking about here. Okay, he's letting us to understand that as long we African, we do not go back to re-establish of our existence what we were doing before European came to the African continent, right? And we continue to be conditioned with their Eurocentric mindset or doctrine of education, of how life supposed to be. This is how we are going to live. And at the end of the day, the reality here, he's trying to tell us that one who have that dominant power over you, right, control your mind, your movement, and everything about you. You can have your own self-thoughts, but everything you think is of him. And once that happens, it put that person in a state of being a supreme being or a supreme power, right, over you. It put that person in a state of mind of being a superior, and while you being the inferior being. And until we can come from that delusional mindset as African people and understand that everything that exists actually existed from the establishment of Black people, right? Until we can come to realize that we will always think that everything that exists or that have existed have been from European, how they call it, or Dutch or educational system, or have been established by European. But when you look at history, it tells us that everything European people have come to achieve or derive from the consciousness of the Black man, from the creation of the Black man. Until we can realize that, it's going to be difficult for us. We're going to live in a frame of mind of being superior. And that is why, even in today's society, our young folks will always look at the wrong people, right, as instead looking at the right people. And again, the wrong people here in this case are people who have falsified the African consciousness.
I want to highlight something a brother just recently asked. He asked, why have I not reached out to Amos Wilson's colleague, brother Saba Plata? He's still alive. I'm familiar with that brother. I know brother Ikimba knows him, so I've actually been thinking about reaching out to him. I'm actually glad you brought that up. We definitely got to build with that brother. Even Dr. Amos, even in the book, mentions, or hopefully I can pull it up real quick. So he goes dedication, Sabubu and Plata. I butchered that brother's name. And Joe Gilligan, true incarnations of brotherly love. So brother Dr. Amos had much love for this brother. So definitely my goal sometime this year is to reach out to the brother and hopefully we can build with them and we charge colonialism, because literally everything Dr. Amos has done is a pure representation of what we're doing and what we aim to do. So he's like, these are like our forefather in this. You feel me? So I'm glad you brought that up, brother. Respect.
Yeah, and I want to respond to a question he posed. How do we develop a communal society in an African community, specifically in Detroit? I think it starts with the youth, getting the youth involved in acts of. First, you have to be. Actually, first, let me say this. First, you should be dedicating portions of your time to serving African people, whether that's going to be like organizing in a revolutionary organization fighting for liberation, like We Charge Colonialism, AAPRP, Black Alliance for Peace, right? There's a lot of organizations that you can be a part of that will help in terms of practice African people, right? So you have to dedicate, you have to sacrifice time. All three of us, everybody in WCC, we're sacrificing time, because we're trying to achieve liberation through, the theoretical sense of educational resources. Like, for instance, that's our practice, right? So for instance, that's an aspect of that you have to be engaged in first, praxis. You have to be engaged in praxis, whether that's you're developing communal aspects of policing the neighborhoods and the communities, right? So you have to be doing something where you're distributing water, clothing, and food to displaced Africans in Detroit. You have to be engaged in some form of service, some form of social good to African people, right?
Yeah.
And then you have to get into the youth, right? So then we have to politically educate, politically rectify our youth, right? So once we do that, once we get the youth on code, and once we in the presence are on code, then we can incorporate the youth into the praxis, right? So we can get the youth involved, and we can get elementary schoolers involved, middle schoolers involved, high schoolers involved, college students involved, right? Then Detroit starts to look really, really different, right? Then the children start to look really, really different, right? Because they're coming up in an age where all they see, all they hear about is our best interest. What is our best interest? What does our best interest look like economically, politically? What does our best interest look like in praxis, right? When it comes to how we practice serving our community, right? The most vulnerable aspects of our community, right? So once that gets on code, just like Dr. Amos Wilson said, we get a computer scientist, right? He wants to do computer science. He's doing coding. He's doing coding for the community because he's trying to bring educational resources and funding into the community, right? When we get a business administrator, he's not trying to go run other businesses. He's trying to develop businesses for his community, right? So then we start engaging in communalism, right? The true aspect of socialism, right? And it starts again with what you're doing, right? What you're establishing in Detroit, and then reaching out to the kids and getting the kids into it and politically educating the kids, right? Raising their collective consciousnesses, trying to decolonize them in the ways of how they identify socially, culturally, right? How they identify in terms of being individuals versus being individuals that exist in a community. We over I, right? And once we do that in Detroit, we start doing that in Atlanta. Then we start doing that in DC. Then we start doing that in Philly. Then we start doing that in Baltimore. Then we start doing that in California. Then we start doing that everywhere, right? And that's nation building in and of itself. That's true nation building, right? We start erecting small state level societies, right? And we start pouring in the economic funding into our communities, right? And that was Amos Wilson's goal. That was his dream. That is what he was fighting for. The last 5 pages of this book was essentially that. That's exactly what it was. And I think I hope that really answers your question, but I think that's what we're trying to do here at WCC, distribute some of those alternative educational resources, right? So we can equip the people with solutions, right, to alleviate the issues that are afflicting African people, right?
And there's a question here. Let me see if I can elaborate on that question a little bit from Tizu. He said, all panelists, what have you not joined forces with Oba T. Shaka, who is working on shifting consciousness? So I think what I want to get from here is the consciousness aspect. I believe if they are working towards the consciousness of African people, right, worldwide, right, then we are working in the same direction. We don't have to be part of the same organization, okay? And the reason why we don't have to be part of the same organization is this. It's very easy for the system, okay, to come against one organization. And we African people, once this is systemic, once one of our organization member or the top head is tampered with, automatically the entire organization dissolves. We saw that with Marco Garvey. All right. Once Marco Garvey was taken out, what happened to the UNI? It was the end. Because at that time, the Black organization mostly, all right, were the UNI, where they all came together. There was a powerful movement at that time. But there was one man, and that one man, the moment he was taken out, it was the end of the UNI around 1924. Now, we also saw that with Dr. King, all right? There was almost just one movement. And the moment Dr. King was taken out, that was it. The civil rights movement, it just went like that. We saw that with Malcolm X. The moment Malcolm X was taken down, the Organization of African American Unity, where did they go? That was it. It went down. It was because there was no, how they call it, other conscious group to various states, okay, established and have chapter there, all right? So as long the group that you are talking about, they are conscious, okay, in the direction as where we all are doing the same thing. The most important part is that we should have the same mindset. We don't have to be on the same organization, but we have the same mindset, the same mission, okay? And we identify the same common enemies, okay? And we have the same solution. And then at the end of the day, we will meet at a critical point of junction, and then we move forward. But we don't have to be, they don't have to be like in the VCC. Or we don't have to be in, how they call it, in about, how they call it, T-Shaka. We don't have to be with them. But what we can do here is we can coordinate. We can invite members to come, you know, on our platform to talk, to educate us as well, or to educate our follower. They can invite us on a platform, okay, to share our view with their follower. And that's how we're going to build this whole, how they call it, liberation, this whole African consciousness together. But we don't have to come like to say, okay, everybody want to be part of the DCC. No, we're not encouraging that. We're encouraging everybody to be on different organizations as long as we all have the same mindset. Okay, we move on. And like I said, that is why I gave one example of the Israelites, right? They are organized, they are in different places going on. That's the same thing we should do. We don't have to be on the same. Yeah, that's the same thing we should do. As long as we have the same doctrine. The thing here is, as long as we have the same doctrine, the same mindset, that's the most important thing. And then at the end, we can meet. And that is what these Israelites are doing. If Israelites go to Chicago, they meet their brothers. They go to Washington, D.C., they meet their brothers.
Yo, you choose a different example. We can do like the UNIA or something. Come on.
Okay, the UNIA. I know you want it. No, I'm
Bro, Frank. Yo, you must be an Israel, one of them, right?
No,
you
no,
be in the streets.
Don't get me wrong, right? I mean, what I'm saying here is these people are organized. Like, I'm just looking at the organization.
Yeah, I feel you, bro. Please choose a different example.
Yeah, I'm looking at the
I hear you.
of these people. You know,
Yeah.
And in our case, I can tell you, it becomes very difficult to just take one person, out, because we are all around and we have the same, conscious mindset. So it's hard to just come against one person, because at the end of the day, if you go here, we're on the other side. Okay, so we don't want to put ourselves in a situation where if you take out one member, then the entire organization dissolves. That's not what we want. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Well, you can finish, brother. You're gonna say?
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I don't know. Maybe I just don't get your perspective fully. But my opinion is actually very different. Actually, matter of fact, in We Charge Colonialism, hopefully, like we'll tap the brothers and sisters into what we're doing in the future. But what we're trying to build is an African United Front. We want all of our organizations to be partnered to some degree towards an end goal, which is obviously African liberation, right?
Yeah.
But the way our people need to see our organizations united, right? I think I agree. We don't all have to be in one organization. I mean, Garvey's goal was to get every African globally in the UNIA, right? And he did a better job at that than anyone else did. He got more
6 million, bro.
towards
6
those
million.
goals. 6 million. And from even when I hear about that, Brother Sammy, is that was actually an understatement. There may have been a lot more than just 6 million. But he was able to accomplish, because that was his goal, right? His goal was to organize all African people. That's why he was able to organize the most African people ever organized, right? And this was before social media. This was before all the things we have access to now, that we can actually get that information out to our brothers and sisters. I believe very paramount that we build an African United Front between all of our organizations that are really for the liberation of our people, have objectives we go by, and we actually even help each other organize our people. You feel what I'm saying? So maybe I misunderstood where you're coming from, or maybe you have a different perspective than I do on that, brother. But I think it's very paramount for our liberation. I don't think we can actually have African liberation without an African United Front.
Yeah. Just let me clarify that, right? I'm not saying that we cannot, build with them, or we cannot collaborate, or we cannot come together, right? What I'm saying here is as long we have the same mindset, and that is why before I end my statement, I say at the end of the day, then we all can come together at a critical point of junction and then move forward. It's very easy if we all have identified the situation, even though we're in different organizations. It's very easy for us to come together to unite once we all have identified the situation, right? It's very easy for us to unite or come together if we all have the same common mindset, right? Or the same mission or the same focus as to where we are going. It's going to be easy for us to, mutually come together. And to just add to tease what he said, he says, Frank, do you understand the need for the systemic building of African consciousness? Abba T. Shakar is advancing our pedagogy, how they call it. Do you understand the difference? I think my statement maybe he did not understand me, but again, like I said, as long their consciousness is in line with our consciousness, okay? My point here is we don't, I will say this again, we don't have to be in the same organization, okay? But as long their consciousness is in line with our consciousness, our mission is in line with their mission, right? It's in line of liberating the African people or liberating African people worldwide, all of those things. It is the same thing. We don't have to be like in the same place. But at the end of the day, it is the same movement. It is the same ideology. We can coexist one day at a critical point. And that is why I say we can invite them on our platform to share with our audience. They can invite us on their platform to share with their audience, okay? We can have a gathering where we can share these mutual consciousness together. We don't have to be on the same organization, okay? That's my point. Even Kwame Ture said, we don't have to be African people at this time. We don't have to be on the same organization. What is important is, as long as we have the same mission, the same mindset, the same goal, that's the most important thing, because we want to get to every part of the world, every corner of the world to get to our people. Being in the same organization, okay, if being in the same organization will means to move swiftly to our people, that's fine. If being in different organizations but with the same mindset will still entail getting to our people faster, that's fun. And that's my point. So if you did not understand me, I'm not saying I do not understand the consciousness of these people. They are doing a great job. That's fine. We are also doing a great job. That's fine. Just because we are not leaving WCC to say, okay, we are going to leave WCC and go be part of ABBA, that does not mean we do not understand them. Just because I said we should be in different organizations, that does not mean we do not understand them. And that does not mean we are being individual or we are trying to create individual. No, as long as we have the same mindset, the same goal, and the same focus, that's the most important thing about it. And that's how we're going to meet at a critical point. Look, we are fighting a system. We have to fight a system in different angle of society. Okay, as long as we have the same mindset, we have to fight the system in different angle of society. That's my point.
Yeah, and I get some of your hesitancy of getting everyone in one organization, right? If they kill the person who's in charge, I get that, and that's actually, I think we have to redefine or look to different ways of organizing or even leadership. It shouldn't just be one individual. Yeah. I think we now have to be very clear about that. They kill all of our leaders. So we need to be very clear. We shouldn't have that one individual. The individual should be the organization, right? Ideally, the movement, right? When I say African United Front, that's a movement. That's uniting all African organizations that have the same objectives, African liberation, and agree on ideologies. Even you brought up earlier, you brought up a great point, to be clear about who our enemies are. You and I have discussed this many times at this point in time, that there are people who even call themselves Pan-Africanists who don't view the enemy as the enemy, white people as the enemy, people who have been historic, who put us in this condition, right? So we need to be very clear about that. Just because we share an objective in Pan-Africanism is an objective, not an ideology. And I do agree with that. but not all people who agree, who align on that objective have the same ideology, right? So we need to be very clear about that as well. So you bring up a great point, and I want to real quick bring up this point this brother mentioned earlier. His number's on the book. Yeah, that brother's number is on the book. I did see that. I'm definitely gonna reach out to him. I'm glad you brought that up. We Charge Colonialism does need to reach out to that elder. You'd be very helpful in the work we're doing. So I do appreciate that, brother. Anything else to add, brother Frank?
No, man. I think it's already 1 o'clock. There's nothing to add. All I
Yeah.
want to say.
So what I'm gonna, yeah.
Yeah, all
Go
I
ahead,
want to
brother.
say, we had a great discussion, and thank you to our followers. Thank you for all those great questions. We may not have answered fully to your understanding, but I think you understood our direction and where we are heading. Thank you for being on here. Great discussion, and thank you to the team and to the organization.
Yep, and what I want to wrap up with is this is our first book. So this is the first book we're doing the review on. So this is the Falsification of African Consciousness book review by We Charge Colonialism. This is the first of many. We're actually preparing for our next book. And if you want to join our conversations, literally our book club reviews weekly are just like this. Have nice conversations, sometimes debates, right, about these things. And you can sign up at our Patreon, which the link should be in our description. And I also put a link of the book, The Falsification of African Consciousness, in the chat where you can actually purchase the book. And it's actually from African World Info Systems that was actually created by Dr. Amos. So that's actually his company, right? That, and all of his, most if not all of his books are on there. So I'd recommend that's a great place to get his books. And please, at least start off with Dr. Amos's lectures online. He has a ton of lectures. That's how I started off. In my opinion, he's like my favorite mind by far. So if you're interested in African consciousness, if you're interested in the liberation of African people, look into Dr. Amos. And appreciate you guys for being tapped in with us today.